and welcome to our segment on Sigmund Freud, born Sigismund Shlomo Freud. I think it's important that you look at people's lives because it gives context to what they studied. So there's a few things about Freud's history that I'll want to point out, and then hopefully it'll put some of the work that he did in context. But first, I think to get to know Freud, I think it would be important to consider this. According to Freud, there were three major blows to the self-esteem of humanity. And I'm wondering, if you've even given that some thought. What are some major blows to humanity's self-esteem? I don't know that I had. But if I were to come up with a list, I think it might look a little bit different than Freud's. But let's take a look. First, he said Copernicus dealt a major blow to the self-esteem of humanity. He said that Copernicus, saying that Earth is not the center of the universe, rattled our entire place in the universe. So we don't have this special thing in the universe where everything revolves around us. We're actually a small portion of something that's much bigger than we are. The next big blow to the self-esteem of humanity was Darwin. Darwin let us know that we are not part of or a product of this special creation, but we are, in fact, descended from lower animals, as he put it. The only relief that we as humans get from the thing that Darwin dealt to us is this idea that at least we are able to think rationally about our own behavior, where other animals cannot. This third and final blow to the self-esteem of humanity came from Freud himself, because it was Freud that let us know that no, we are not, in fact, above other animals by being rational, that we are, in fact, highly irrational, and we are driven primarily by instincts and motivated by unconscious processes, that we are not as rational as we think we are. I find it interesting that Freud put himself here as the third major blow to the self-esteem of humanity. The thing is that most of Freud's ideas, most of the ones that he was famous for sure, in his lifetime, were not entirely original. He got a lot of stuff from some other people. Of course, he put some stuff together in a very novel way. And as we look at it now, Freud was a scientist for his day, but by today's standards, we wouldn't consider what he did science. Now, I hope that I not only show you what he thought and some of the big points in, what he studied and what he believed, but I also hope to impress upon you why it matters so much. And I'm saying that as somebody who, will refrain as much as I can from editorializing. I am not somebody who would follow or subscribe to any sort of psychoanalytic approach that Freud would have recommended. I disagree with him on almost everything. And yet, I do think that in the course of psych history, Freud is probably quite important, actually. So Freud was a biological determinist. That's how he would have described himself. That, as I've said already, humans are driven by instincts, that our behavior is motivated by unconscious processes, that we are irrational. And yet, when you look at what he studied, in part, he focuses a lot on this childhood relationship with a child and the primary caregiver, typically the mother. So, as such, it seems very relevant to take a look at his early history. So, Freud was born in 1856. And right off the bat, the secrecy begins, because there's the public record was that Freud was born May 6th. But I think it might be possible that he was actually born March 6th. So the reason for the lie, the big scandal, first consider the years, 1856. Freud's dad had already had a previous marriage, actually 2 previous marriages. That was also kind of hidden for a while. But he had already been married. He already had 2 kids from a previous marriage. And it looks like Freud's mom became pregnant with Freud before she and her husband were married. So the scandal, wow. The other interesting thing was when they got married, he was 40, she was 20, and one of Freud's older half-siblings was 20 as well at the point when Freud's dad married Freud's mom. Otherwise, some basics about Freud's history is that he did graduate the top of his class and went on to medical school. He took 8 years to graduate instead of 4. But the reason that he went to medical school was because it was one of the places that allowed Jews to enter in Austria. If you consider his dates when he lived, that not all schools were, open to somebody like Freud. And really, right there, I kind of want to put Freud in context because I think this helps to illustrate why he is actually so important. Even I can say that when I'm going to say I don't agree with almost anything that he came up with, which recognizes as editorializing. There are other people that do. I'm just not one of them. But here's something that's sort of inarguable. Freud was a biological determinist, but he also focused on that parent-child relationship. Which is interesting because, one, you kind of wonder about his relationship with his mom when you look at some of the theories he came up with. But what was happening at the time, as you recall, like I just said, that he couldn't go to any school that he wanted to because he was Jewish. There were only some things that were open to him. And you have to remember that intelligence testing was also really big at this time. You remember us discussing Simon and Binet and how they were creating intelligence tests to help treat or predict, really, academic performance of kids in schools. Remember, they wanted to find those kids that they called them bright, that were high achievers, and the ones that would struggle, that they had then called dull. Identify the dull kids, as they said, ahead of time, recommend mental orthopedics, and try to help them in school. The whole idea was to help kids who would be struggling. But we know that intelligence testing fed into this eugenics movement, that idea that there's a selective breeding, this superior race sort of thing that is also going to fuel a lot of what was happening in Nazi Germany. It wasn't just Nazi Germany where that type of thinking was happening. And that's where Freud ends up so important, because people don't, you don't learn about Freud and think meh, whatever. People have strong reactions to it. They really get into it or they really don't like it. And so there was so much interest in the types of things Freud was studying. And he did put so much focus on this unconscious mind, on this dreams and that sort of thing, on looking at instincts, but he also focused on parent-child relationships. And he actually was one of the people that helped to move the discussion in psychology away from this superior intelligence testing sort of thing to, let's look at parenting and what that looks like. And honestly, the fact that he was able to, as effectively as he did, move the conversation in a different direction, I would credit him for literally saving countless lives. And that is why I think that his place in history is earned. That when you ask most people, hey, what's the first psychologist that you can think of, first famous psychologist, that Freud is usually the number one answer that you're going to get. And I'm going to say that for that reason alone, he deserved it, because people really react to him. And that reaction brought about some pretty good stuff. And I do think it's important because I think a lot of people that have heard of Freud have also heard about Freud being addicted to cocaine. Now, obviously, we know now what cocaine does. We know why it's dangerous. We know that it's working the D2A1 allele in the nuclear accumbens. We know this stuff. We know that what addiction for it looks like. We also know that how any one particular use of cocaine could be fatal because it affects the medulla. It could cause heart attacks. It could cause seizures, cocaine psychosis. It could cause people to have car accidents or, lead to suicide. We know all of this about cocaine now, but he didn't have that information then. So Freud discovered that some German army physician reported that it enhanced the endurance of his soldiers. So Freud took it for himself and found that it had, as he put it at the time, no negative side effects. And he thought it relieved his depression. So he thought he could concentrate better. He called it a magical substance. He was wholly unaware of exactly how dangerous it was. So he started giving the drug freely to his wife, sisters, friends, colleagues. He published 6 articles recommending it as a stimulant, a local anesthetic, a cure for indigestion. He thought quite mistakenly that it would be a harmless substitute for morphine. He was way, way off the base. And he was actually mad because this guy, Carl Kohler, had used it in eye surgery, and he got, worldwide fame overnight as a result. Freud wanted that fame for himself. But obviously this is going to turn on him because reports of addiction and death are going to come in. Heart attacks, seizures, the stuff that we know that cocaine does, it's going to start happening. And Freud's reputation in the medical community was completely damaged because he became closely associated with the drug. Freud himself, he said he never became addicted to cocaine. He was addicted to nicotine, actually smoking around 20 cigars a day. I'll get to that in a second. But what a lot of people fail to mention, because like I said, now we know the dangers of this, Freud actually deeply regretted his use, both personal and private. And he wrote papers after these episodes calling it the third scourge of man, right after alcohol and morphine. So he did backtrack. He did deeply regret what he had done. But his reputation failed to recover from it. Now, just for necessity, I am going to have to skip over like a lot of his research and just focus on the ones that are important for the AP exam, or the ones that are most important for the AP exam. But Freud's theories are going to focus on this fact that we have instincts, something to remember that he said that it totally damaged the self-esteem of humanity. So the first one, a source instinct, would be from a bodily deficiency. So, which is why people would have an instinct towards eating because they're hungry, or sex, or sleep, that sort of thing. So it's some type of bodily deficiency that needs to be resolved. So the aim is the look to remove that bodily deficiency, so that you look for food to relieve the hunger. You look for a partner to relieve the sex, the bed to relieve the sleep. The object is going to overlap with that because that is something that's used to remove the bodily deficiency. And then the impetus is determined by the magnitude of the inefficiency. So, for example, hunger caused by need of food, there's your source, wants to eliminate the need for food, there's your aim, will seek and ingest food, that's the object, and the intensity with which these activities occur depends upon how long one has been without food. And it's going to be these types of instincts that drive all human behavior, according to Freud. So the three types of life and death instincts you have, the first one would be called eros, and this is your collective life instinct. It exists to preserve life. The libido is part of this life instinct, and it's the sexual energy. The final would be thanatos, which is an aggression that's from the need for self-destruction, so freedom from the struggle for biological needs, but it's turned outwards towards others or objects rather than inward towards the self. So it causes aggression, which we know is an intent to do harm, murder, cruelty. These things would all derive from the death instinct. So one of the tools that Freud would use to get to the unconscious mind was called free association. And you might think of it as like, if I say the color red, what are the first things that come to mind? And you might say apple, fire truck, teacher, school, whatever. It kind of works like that. In fact, there are some free association tests that do exactly that. And they watch, like, so if whatever term I say, you say something in response, and I check to see if you're repeating yourself, if you're rhyming, how long it took you to say something, to try to see what's going on in your unconscious mind. That would be a psychoanalytic tool. But one of the things with psychoanalysis is that you could go into a psychoanalysis session with somebody like Freud, and he might not say anything to you at all. You might be sitting on a literal couch, lying down on a literal couch, where nothing is said to you because they don't want to influence what you're going to say. And I like that too, that Freud actually recognized the importance of the words, that even a word that he might choose might tell you how you're feeling about it. So, for example, if somebody were to come in and say that they were upset because, let's say their mother-in-law passed away, so they are upset. And Freud would say, "Oh, I'm so sorry for your loss." Freud would say the act of saying that you're sorry for their loss has restricted the person's emotional expression. So here you are coming to your therapist and you're supposed to be able to speak freely. And maybe, your mother-in-law was horrible to you. Maybe she was, awful. And one of the things you wanted to talk to your therapist about is that you are, in fact, actually feeling some relief. And maybe you feel bad because you're feeling some relief. And so if Freud were to say, I'm sorry for your loss, he kind of walled off that conversation, because now the patient will feel as though they are being judged because maybe they're not sad and maybe they feel like they should be sad, or maybe the situation is just more complex than that. So Freud would refuse to use words because he knew that he recognized that they worked as constructs and he didn't want to influence what you were thinking. So you go in there and you say nothing, and if he won't ask you anything, and so you could sit there and have a quiet session and make your payment at the end of that session where nothing gets said at all, and keep coming back and doing the same thing, and that's fine, because when you have something to say, you'll say it. And a lot of times people will sit there and think like, okay, what do I have to say? What do I have to say? And they'll start talking about what comes to their mind, and Freud will work with that. But his attempt would be to work with it from the perspective of how it's affecting you without putting sort of any judgment on that for you. I mean, to that end, it doesn't sound that bad to me at all. I do like that he was thinking about the power of words in that way. But what he was doing was he was trying to uncover hurtful memories, things from your childhood. So release these painful, unconscious memories from your childhood, and often they weren't real. And then he'd come to some conclusions, and the idea is after years of therapy, you would discover all of these things about your childhood, and at the end, this insight would give you change. And see, this is where he and I would part ways in a very extreme way, is because my experience is that insight doesn't lead to change. That you can tell somebody, hey, you're behaving this way, and here are the reasons why. And that now you go, okay, like now I know why I'm doing it, but it doesn't make you stop. It just makes you aware of it. That could be a good starting place, but that in itself won't bring change. Freud thought that type of insight would. So his type of therapy is called an insight-based therapy. And I've tried this activity with classes because it's kind of fun just to see what they come up with. So it's like, okay, take 2 minutes and you have to write down, anything that comes to your mind. It doesn't matter what it is. The only rule is that for the whole 2 minutes, you can't pick up your pen at all. You must be writing the entire time. And so kids do, and whatever. And then, if people want to share, they can. And at the end of it, we throw it away, obviously, because we don't want that. And what I find that to be really useful for, to be honest, is to kind of get around writer's block. So it's sort of a modern twist on that. When you have nothing to say, sometimes just writing anything down, and it will move you in a direction where you kind of start to generate some ideas. What Freud was hoping to get to was this idea of your unconscious mind. And Freud defined it as this reservoir of mostly unacceptable thoughts, wishes, feelings, desires, all of that like impulse stuff that you've mostly repressed. Today we look at this unconscious mind as, there is processing that happens outside of your awareness. And we know when we were looking at, like, say, the tip of the tongue syndrome, when we were talking about memory, I studied for this test and I'm sitting down and I cannot remember that thing, and I know I studied it. I know where I was when I studied it, and I know it, and it's not coming. And then a couple hours later, you're sitting in class and bam, that just pops right into your head. Well, yep, because there's some sort of unconscious processing that is happening outside of your awareness, and that's more how we see it now, not at this deep, dark place. And according to Freud, your unconscious is going to show itself in dreams, hypnosis, jokes, parapraxis, otherwise known as Freudian slips. So he did a lot of dream analysis. In fact, I'll actually talk more about Freud's dream analysis when we look at Carl Jung's stuff. But I think you could kind of look at it basically like this. Like, okay, so you had a dream about horseback riding. Okay, well, horseback riding would have been the manifest content. That was what your dream was actually about. The latent content meant that's what's hidden. So what was hidden was a dream about sex, according to Freud. So you had a dream where you had a gun in the dream, and the manifest content, the gun is a gun. That's what you dreamt about. The latent content would have been that gun meant a penis in your dream. If you start to look at his dream analysis, you'll start to pick up on patterns like that. And Freud did practice hypnosis, but he didn't do it very successfully. He was unable to get patients into this trance effectively. But since hypnosis is an altered state of consciousness and dreams are also, they occur during sleep, so another altered state of consciousness, he felt that he could focus more on dreams than hypnosis ultimately. Jokes would have been another thing that gets to your, unconscious, because, what is it that you're joking about? There's going to be something there, some reason why you're finding that funny, something happening. And the parapraxis, or the Freudian slips, you're out on a date and you call your girlfriend mom. That would be a Freudian slip. You call out of work and you say, I can't come into work today because my grandmother lied. That would be another Freudian slip. If I were to hey, you know what, guys? It was such a job working with you today. Joy. It was such a joy working with you today. That would be another example. And he would say that there's some truth behind the slip. Thus, that's why it happens. Actually, I had a great one teaching about Freud's psychosexual stages to an AP class, and I said successful resolution, but instead of saying, well, that's what I intended to say, successful resolution, and instead I said sexual revolution. So Freud would have had something to say about that for sure. I just thought that was cute. So there it is. And this one too. Okay, so what is going on in your unconscious mind, which would also be happening with your id, is this primary process thinking. This is what rules the unconscious mind. It is not cause and effect. It's not illogical. It's very fantasy based. So the only concern with your unconscious mind and your id really is this wanting what it wants right now, this immediate gratification. It would not take reality into account. It's not thinking about long-term gain, long-term pleasure, long-term success. It's thinking now, now, now. So Freud's personality structure and his iceberg theory is all going to go together. But you see your unconscious mind, and if you look at your personality, that big iceberg, the bulk of your unconscious mind, or the bulk of your mind, I should say, is unconscious. Your preconscious mind is out of your awareness, but ultimately retrievable, so it's always running behind the scenes. So it's like that tip of the tongue thing. You forgot the answer for the test, and later on, you were able to pull it out because it was running in your preconscious mind. You weren't aware of it, but it was right near the surface. So there's your preconscious mind, right near the surface. The conscious mind is fully accessible, but it is not able to access the unconscious mind. So your conscious mind, unconscious mind are not communicating directly with each other. But the conscious mind is going to be reality-based, going to do more secondary process thinking. It's logical, it's mature, it's more time-oriented, and it takes time as a person develops to gain more of a conscious mind. And so there's your conscious mind as it relates to the personality structure. So the biggest part of your personality, which is entirely unconscious, is your id. Your id has these sexual and aggressive drives. It operates on the pleasure principle. So it really wants to demand immediate gratification of biological needs. It's responsible for wish fulfillment, primary process thinking that I've already described. The life and death instincts would be here. It is completely unconscious, and it's present at birth. You can kind of think of the id as your inner 2-year-old. That 2-year-old that immediately wants what it wants, can't wait, that sort of thing. Just seeks pleasure, wants what it wants when it wants it. So there's your id, the biggest part of your personality, like an iceberg, the biggest part underneath the water, entirely unconscious. You're not aware of it at all, but it will affect your personality. The next part is your ego, and this develops out of a need to match the inside pictures that your id is creating with what's happening in the outside world. So the id is going to work on the reality principle. So when your id wants something, food or drinks or whatever it might be, your ego's job is to find something appropriate. And the ego is going to be involved in this reality testing. So it has to find out what the id wants and balance it out with what is a good idea in the real world based on what the superego is going to tell it to do. So this is secondary process thinking here, the realistic efforts of the ego that bring about true biological satisfaction. The ego has another important job though, and it employs ego defense mechanisms. And we will look at those in another slide. So that repression, suppression, rationalization, projection, that sort of stuff. The ego's job is to kind of control those things. And there you have the ego, how it's partly conscious, partly unconscious. And lastly, you have your superego, which develops at about age 4 or 5 through the successful resolution of the Oedipal complex, which I will explain. But this is basically the moral arm of your personality, your inner conscience, your inner Jiminy Cricket. But if you have too strong of a superego, you'll be very virtuous, but you'll be very guilt-ridden. You'll feel bad about lots of things. A very weak superego, and you'll be self-indulgent and remorseless and capable of horrible acts. So you kind of want to find a balance between being virtuous but not overly guilt-ridden. And there is your superego. Again, partly conscious, partly unconscious, will communicate with both the ego and the id. And this entire thing is called Freud's iceberg theory.